Hello everyone and welcome to Academia Blockchain. Today I have a very special guest. He is Derrick Broze from the Conscious Resistance Network. He's one of the founders of the Conscious Resistance Network. I admire your work and I've been following you for several years, and I also follow your activism. So welcome, Derrick, and it's very good to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate bringing me on your channel and just getting to catch up with you a little bit.
So I would like to begin with, Derrick has been investigating the topic of 5G and is one of the few people in the alternative media that take the topic of 5G very seriously. So you have to look at his documentary. It's called The 5G Trojan Horse, and it's eye-opening. So Derrick, what is the theory behind the idea that 5G is bad for health?
Okay, well, thanks, and I appreciate you checking out the documentary. And I will say, and maybe you can help with this, we are working on Spanish translations and Italian translations and other translations for the documentary too, as well as my books are about to be translated to Spanish. So hopefully we get to introduce a lot of my work to some new people. But yeah, I mean, so I've been investigating 5G for about going on 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. And the documentary obviously is sort of exposing the corruption involving governments. It focuses on the US and in America, but obviously this is a worldwide problem. Government corruption is everywhere. And particularly the companies, the telecommunication companies, the telecoms as some people call them, or they're also known as big wireless sometimes, which is like Verizon and Sprint and T-Mobile, those companies. And in other companies around the world that are all interconnected, they have basically got control over the government policy. And, I'm, as an anarchist, I'm not somebody who's really much for government regulation, but the fact of the matter is that these companies have developed a revolving door relationship with governments around the world. And they have, since the 80s, and maybe even before, since the 80s, the telecommunication companies have been able to use their money and their power and their influence to shut down any research into cell phones. And that's what we're dealing with, is cellular technology. So I'll explain what 5G is in just a moment, but just to kind of preface this, we're dealing with cellular technology, whether it's what we call 1G, which is the old school, very first phones that were big kind of brick phones, and then you had 2G, and it just means one generation, second generation, third generation, fourth generation, and then 5G is the fifth generation. So all the way back to the very beginning of cell phones in the 80s, the telecom companies have been using their money, their power, their influence to work with the governments to get themselves into positions of power, but also to shut down any research, any studies that were showing negative effects of cell phones and 1G, 2G, 3G, et cetera. And so here we are now and going to the 2020s, and we're moving into the next generation, the fifth generation, because basically they have appeared every 10 years. So 1979 was 1G, 1989, 2G, 99, 3G, 2009, it was about 4G, which is what most of us are used to. And then going to 2019, 2020, 5G is starting to be introduced everywhere. So this is what we're dealing with. And so as far as the health concerns go, in my documentary, I interviewed Dr. Martin Pall, who is a scientist in the US based on the West Coast, who has been doing research on Wi-Fi and cell phones and now on 5G and studying how they affect our cells. I mean, the fact of the matter is, and in my documentary, we have the transcript, you can read all the sources and go to all the studies yourself and check them out yourself, that there are just a number of studies, independent studies that have been done, sometimes outside of the United States, often outside of the United States because they won't fund it here in the US. And these studies have shown problems with affecting our sleep, which I think is a major way that this affects us, because what you understand is, I'm sitting about 10 feet away from a Wi-Fi router right now. You might be sitting near one as well. So those are putting off an electromagnetic field. This is part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and all devices, electronic devices, have these, cell phones, tablets, laptops, computers, Wi-Fi routers, and in 5G, are all putting off a field. And so we're constantly being exposed to this. Now, there have already been studies that have come out showing that there have been health problems associated with 2G and 3G, which people have been using since the 90s, showing an increase in tumors in the ear, tumors of the heart and the brain. This was a 2016 study that came out just a couple of years ago by the US government. They're called the National Toxicology Program. So we already know that there are health problems associated with stuff that people have been using for decades. Now with 5G, in order for us to go, and you're probably familiar with this, some of your listeners, in order for us to have this future that in some ways sounds really beautiful, like blockchain, AI, you know, all the beautiful ways that technology can free us and liberate us and help us move forward.
Yeah.
But that's all going to require 5G. In order for us to move to the Internet of Things, in order for us to move to everything interconnected and higher speed data, we have to go to 5G. In order for 5G to operate, the US government and other governments around the world are going to have to install what they call small cells. These are not like full-on cell towers. Sometimes they just look like a cylinder, like a round antenna, and they'll put them on top of existing lights. And sometimes they look like a little box on the side of a light pole. So they're called small cells. And these small cells use millimeter waves, which if you know about millimeter waves, they don't travel very far. They're easily blocked. So they say that in order for us to have this fast speed, virtual reality, augmented reality, driverless cars, blockchain, you know, AI, that we have to move to 5G. In order for that to operate, we have to install new small cells or towers every 100 to 200 feet, which is not very, I don't know what that is in meters, but it's not very far at all. So we're going to end up with hundreds of thousands of new towers and cell sites all across the US and other countries that are adopting it. And so the big danger then is what I'm pointing to is that we have health problems related to tumors. We have health problems related to messing with our sleep, related to cell production, related to, there are some studies that have shown DNA strand breaks and also mutations on the DNA level. And all this information has been denied by the mainstream. We are told that it's safe, that sunlight and X-rays and gamma rays, those are known as ionizing radiation that are dangerous. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you have non-ionizing radiation, cell phones, microwaves, radio waves. And we've always been told that that means it's safe, that it can't cause harm to us. This is not true at all. This is not supported by the evidence once you actually start to look into it. And so the whole point of the documentary, I guess, and what I'm trying to say here is that we've got pre-existing problems with the existing technology already. So even if they stopped rolling out 5G today all around the world and we didn't go any further, we would still have to contend with the fact that right now, you know, I'm being exposed to the EMFs from this computer that I'm looking at, from this other laptop next to me, from that Wi-Fi router. And in our daily lives, we are being exposed to more radio frequency radiation than human beings have ever in our history. And with 5G, with them installing these towers and these cells every 100 to 200 feet, we're going to be exposed to radio frequency radiation at levels that we've never experienced before. So it hasn't been tested in the real world. You know, they claim that, oh, it's safe. We already know it's safe. There's no reason to test it. But it's a very crazy situation. And for those of us who are anarchists and understand how the state works, I mean, it's just more statism, honestly. It's just the state working with the corporations to screw the people. And, you know, there's also surveillance concerns. You know, there's a lot in this topic, but the health, of course, is a big part of it.
Yes, the health is a big part of it. And I can totally believe that if we are made of water, you know, all of our bodies made of water, and there is a radiation, as you describe it, at non-ionizing radiation. What does that mean? Can we elaborate on that a bit more?
So they, like I said, the ionizing radiation is on, like if you're looking at a spectrum, you could pull up a picture for the video if you'd like. And basically on one side of the spectrum, you have sun rays, you have gamma rays, you have X-rays, you have things of that sort. And then once you cross over into what they call non-ionizing. So ionizing, first of all, it means it can ionize, it can mutate or affect your DNA down to the DNA level, right? That, you know, that's why when you go to take an X-ray, they make people put on this little body cover suit thing, you know, to protect yourself, because they know that those X-rays can cause harm to your and damage to your DNA and your body if you're constantly exposed to them. The same way that chemotherapy, that radiation damages your body, right? But then when you get over to the non-ionizing radiation, the reason it's given that name is because we have been told that when it comes to, say, picking up a cell phone, that the only danger from cell phones is the heating. So if you hold this thing to your head, you know, and let's say you're on the phone or you're streaming a call, the phone has to work that much harder to send out the signal. So it's going to start to heat up, right? And you can feel the heat on your skin, like, oh, wow, it's getting too hot. Well, in the mainstream scientific and governmental world, they have said that the only danger from cell phones and from EMF exposure is because of the heat. And so they've said that non-ionizing radiation, it can cause heat problems, like it might burn your skin, but allegedly, according to the governments, that means it can't affect you down to the DNA level. But as I actually just put out a brand new article, I'll send it to you and you can put it in your show notes if you like it. I just put it out on Mint Press News.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty long investigation. It turned out to be about 4,000 words investigation into not just 5G and the topics we're talking about, the health, but the people behind what they call the race to 5G. So, you know, they've been pushing this message, the race to 5G, the race to 5G, you know, we got to get there. And it's kind of like a geopolitical thing too, where US and China are racing to who can get there faster, right? So they're pushing this idea, and you see the commercials where it's all the people looking happy. They got the new 5G phones and it's so much faster. The marketing's out there right now, right? Yes. So I looked into who are the people behind the race to 5G, and it's this company or this lobbying group called the CTIA, the Cellular Telephone Internet Association, and they are connected to companies all around the world, but they do a lot of lobbying in the US. They're funded by all the big telecom companies around the world. And so they have basically infiltrated the government, and all the way back to, I think it was 1990, like you can go back to the early 90s and you can actually find real journalism and mainstream reports talking about the dangers of cell phones, because in the early 90s, there were lawsuits being filed when people were starting to get tumors in their above their ears. And it's just been 30 years now, and the telecoms have gotten so much more powerful. They're also integrated with the media. Last year, the New York Times and the Washington Post announced that they were going to be doing partnerships with AT&T and Verizon on 5G journalism. And so, of course, they put out articles attacking anybody who questions, you know, 5G. And there's all these conflicts of interest that, I mean, like I said, if you've been around long enough or paid attention long enough, it's not surprising, but it is very disturbing because, I mean, they're pushing forward as fast as possible. Even with the COVID-19 and everything going on, they're pushing 5G forward as the solution for, you know, we need distance learning and we need telemedicine, telehealth. Well, that's all going to need 5G. We need, you know, all these new technologies to help us deal with the COVID-19 world. So it's really interesting how it ties in together, you know?
Yeah, okay. So now that you brought the COVID-19 to the table, I think it's interesting as it's an important point to touch, you know, if there is any relationship between the 5G and the COVID-19. There's been too many conspiracy theories about, you know, 5G and the COVID-19. What is your take on this?
So I have more than a couple of videos on my channel that are discussing this whole COVID-19 5G theory. And I'll say right off the bat, I don't think that, because it seems like there's been a couple different ways of thinking. People have been saying there's no virus, it's 5G that's making people sick. I heard people saying that at the very beginning. Maybe they changed their positions now, but people were like, look, Wuhan had 5G and that's where it supposedly broke out. But now, you know, we're not even sure if it did start in Wuhan. Honestly, you know, there's been a lot of different reports. But that theory quickly fell apart because, you know, I've seen people try to say, look at the 5G map, look at the Wuhan map. I mean, they're not exactly the same. You can try to make them fit, but there are parts of the world that have allegedly, as we're being told, been, you know, affected by COVID-19, and they don't have 5G. You know, there are parts of the world that do have 5G that are fine now. And then the other thing is, if it was 5G, why would some people get sick and then get better, right? Because it's not like the 5G. If it was 5G, you would think that they would keep being sick, right? They wouldn't just magically get better and then get sick, you know, unless it's just, there's a lot of things that don't add up. But what I will say is the truth that I think is in there is that there are studies that clearly show that RFR, radio frequency radiation, and just to clarify, so when we're dealing with the electromagnetic spectrum from radio waves to cell phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and in 5G, you know, they're all different. They're measured in megahertz and gigahertz, but they're different parts of this electromagnetic spectrum as we describe it, right? So they are different. They're not exactly all the same, but they're in a similar range. And we know that Wi-Fi affects the human body. We know that Bluetooth is affecting the human body. We know that 2G and 3G and these different things. And then we also know that over here in the gigahertz where they want to open up 5G, that the US military has studied crowd control weapons that use that same frequency, you know, and that they describe that it can burn skin. So anyways, my point was saying that is that so when we're looking at the spectrum, 5G is just one part of that spectrum, right? So there's already pre-existing problems. And the pre-existing problems that we've seen do show that it affects our immune system, that exposure to radio frequency radiation can affect our immune system. It can affect cells' ability to repair themselves at night, because it affects our melatonin in multiple ways. You know, it's the blue light from staring at the screens all day, but also just the effect of the radio frequency radiation. It can affect your pineal gland, your thyroid gland, and in these different ways that it's breaking down our immune systems, it could make you more susceptible to getting sick, you know, to COVID-19 or whatever. That doesn't mean that they're the same exact thing, but I definitely think that as we're starting to surround ourselves with more devices, and with 5G, they want it to be internet of everything, internet everywhere, internet, you know, sensors and microphones, and all these things are going to be putting off their own electromagnetic field and exposing us at levels that we've never experienced before. That could potentially make people sick. And, you know, so I think that's the connection, if there is one. Yeah,
I think that's a very important point to make, because it is very important to take this topic in a sober way, you know, in a serious and sober way, and look at it in a scientific way, and to not accept all these theories that comes to us. And on top of that, you have to add the motivations behind the state. You know, the state is a centralization of power, and there are these huge corporations around it. So there are not clear motivations for the state to protect us or to tell the truth of these investigations. If there was an investigation that says something terrible about 5G, you cannot trust the state and be sure that the state will protect you if this is the case. So this connects to the next question I have for you, and it is about the technocratic state. So Derrick, you have this book. It is How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. I totally recommend it. I enjoyed the read a lot, and I think it's very important to read. If you have this will for liberty and you want to take action, well, this book is important, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State. So Derrick, can you share with us what is the technocratic state, and what is your experience and your ideas on what is being built?
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you for picking up the book again. I appreciate that. And yeah, actually that book is one of the ones that I just, I haven't even publicly announced it, so I'll share it with your audience, but I just signed a deal with this company out of Europe. They're called Discovery Publishers. And so they're going to re-release the How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State in Spanish and French this summer. So if you guys, you know, those of you who are Spanish speakers and want to read it Spanish, it should be in your hands this summer. Nice. But yeah, so yeah, thank you, brother. Appreciate it. The technocratic state is kind of what you were just touching on. It's, you know, for one, in my experience, in my research, and my learning, I definitely have seen that some anarchists, and I deal with the anarchists of all stripes, and I read all kinds of anarchist literature, things I completely disagree with and things that I love, because I like to just learn from all the different perspectives of anti-authoritarians throughout history, throughout the world. And what I've noticed is that there are some anarchists who have a blind spot, who think that it's only that our problems only stem from exclusively from the state, you know, and in that sense, I mean, the government or the mafia, the cartel that controls a certain geographic landmass, you know, that's the state, right? So some people, I think, exclusively focus on the state and completely ignore or miss private power. And, you know, I hesitate to call it private because it's not really private. A lot of these corporations are propped up by the state, by subsidies and by statism in one way or another. But the fact of the matter is that some of these companies, these private corporations, are so big, they can afford to buy their own armies, and they can afford to, you know, spy on people, hire their own intelligence agencies. So I think that they're a threat as well. And so when you understand that and you see this corporate state power that's kind of rising and coming together and commingling, and just like with 5G, you have people who work for the FCC that's supposed to regulate the internet and cell phones, and then they go and they're a lawyer for Verizon, and they do that for a couple years, and then they go and work for the CTIA as a lobbyist, and then they go back to the government, and they just do this for their entire career, just in and out, and it's crazy. So when that happens, and as it's gotten to the level we're at now, two of the biggest players that we're seeing, you have big wireless, but also kind of, I think in a bigger way, what some people call big tech, big technology. So like Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. All the companies that we're familiar with that control and in many ways using algorithms manipulate our lives already. And people don't really quite get it yet, but they're already manipulating what we see through search engines and what we see through their platforms and whatnot. Those companies have become immensely powerful. The Bill Gates of the world, these people who are unelected, but they have power, they have influence. And not only that, like Bezos, for example, buying up parts of the Washington Post, Bill Gates using his philanthropy efforts to get good coverage from the media. You know, they're able to influence and to shape a public image. And so these people don't work for the state, but technically they do form some type of, you know, what I call the technocratic state, because these are technologists and scientists, this sort of scientific technocratic, the technocracy, for example, what I describe in the book, it's a philosophy that comes from the mid 1800s, and it spread through America and parts of Europe and US and maybe other parts of the world, but it never really caught on in the mainstream. But what I basically put forward is the idea that even if it didn't catch on in the mainstream, if you look around today, the people that are really the power are the technocrats. They are the Zuckerbergs and the Bezos and the Gates and the you know, the Googles and all the different people who helped create these companies that end up with immense amount of power and influence and money. And so they don't have to be elected. They already wield a power structure. Exactly. So when you put together the state as we know it, say Donald Trump or whatever, the president or the government, all those people, and you put them together with the corporations and particularly with the technology companies that are now manipulating so much of our lives, that apparatus is what I call the technocratic state. And I think it's really starting to come into view. You know, I put the book out in late January, and that was before the shit hit the fan with COVID-19. Now it's like we can see the technocracy is coming out. I mean, they want to use your smartphone to track you everywhere. They have facial recognition, the drone cameras that can see your temperature, the temperature. I mean, it's all coming out now. And they're pushing forward so quickly. So I'm thankful I put the book out when I did, because I think it is very timely right now.
Yes,
and
it is. Yes, man. You talk about different kind of actions we can take, you know, because right now we are being surrounded by technology, and this technology, these spying devices, where do I have mine? Well, these spying devices are sending everything to a central server, and this central server is adding up everything, just everything. And with that, it can be compared to something very interesting, that is the concentration of all the information in the world. People think that the only problem is the surveillance because it will spy on them, but what about the problem of big data? You know, the power of big data is unbelievable. And if you have all the data in the world, you could predict and you could control. This is very important, you know. So what are some of your ideas on how to react on this topic against the technocratic state?
Well, and I think you make a good point there first, man, is that it's not just the surveillance, the kind of more immediate feeling of like, oh, is somebody watching me, looking over my shoulder? Like, nobody likes that feeling. But like you said, the bigger issue, and I think the long-term picture, when humanity's looking back at this time, I think that there will be a lot of regret as for how willingly we gave up so much of our data and how that data ends up being used against us. Because as you said, I mean, they're just feeding this data that we're giving them about our likes, our interests, our locations, our habits, our friend networks, and all this stuff, and putting it into, you know, eventually quantum computers and AI to be able to sit there and read and understand us. And I really do think that the powers that wish they were behind the technocratic state, that they do have human behavior down to an algorithm. I really believe that they understand if we press this button, the people respond this way. And they might even have humanity down to a number of personality types. I mean, maybe they identified it. I'm just kind of spitballing here. Maybe there's only 200 flavors of human in the end, right? We're all just variations of that, and they've got it down to an algorithm. I really do think that, I mean, if you think since Google started in the very early days of the modern internet, and then it's only been about 12 or so years since YouTube, Facebook, and all that were becoming so prominent, and smartphones and everything. So in just over a decade, they've completely integrated into our lives and gathered up so much information. So at this point, you know, talking about solutions, I think that the best thing we can do is to unplug from these systems as much as possible. And it's a lot easier, you know, said than done for a lot of us, because there's the very real addiction that we have to the internet and to dopamine and to interacting with each other and being a part of that online community. It feels good. It's brought a lot of knowledge and a lot of, you know, alliances and great things. But at the end of the day, if we continue to stay on these platforms, then we're only serving their purposes and their ends. And, you know, I know somebody like yourself and your audience are very familiar with alternative blockchain-based decentralized platforms, and I'm sure you're on them. I'm on them. I've been promoting them for years. But I've also recognized that the masses, the mainstream, the normies, whatever you want to call them, they stick to what's right in front of them. Those are the kind of people that they listen to the mainstream music, they go see the movies at the mainstream theaters, they follow the mainstream news, and they use the mainstream social networks. And that's just what they do. They do what's convenient and what's right there in front of them. And, you know, I still think it's worth trying to get people to exit and go elsewhere to other networks and to figure out more secure ways of communicating. But I don't want to say I've given up, but I do recognize that it's a very difficult battle, because so many people feel like if something doesn't filter through their lens on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, then it basically didn't happen. You basically don't exist, you know, if you're not there. And that's the other dangerous part of these tech companies having so much power, is even though they're technically private, funded by Google and InQtel and all these other firms, they can erase you from the digital world. And if 90% of the world is using Facebook and using YouTube to get their information, to get their search in, you know, the YouTube search engine bars is used more than Google itself. So many people go there. And when people search for topics or ideas, if you've been banned or shut down by an algorithm, then you basically don't exist. And I think that's one step away from them, or a couple steps away from them implementing the social credit score, where they can literally kind of delete you from everyday life. So the reason opt-out is in the title is because I really think that it's that simple, and it's also that, you know, that difficult. We have to opt out these systems. I don't see any, and this is just my perspective, I could be totally wrong, and maybe 10 years, everything's going to be fine, I hope. But I do not see a very optimistic outlook if we just continue on the path we are now. If we continue on the path using their internet service providers, using their, you know, servers, using their platforms and their hosting companies and their social media companies and all this infrastructure. I mean, it's not just the social media. We have to go down, because they can take us off social media. If and when they want to, they can take our websites down. You know, they can make it very difficult for people to find us. So as far as the internet goes, we need to unplug from those systems as much as possible. There are definitely different tools. You know, I've been trying to look into using, getting, whenever it's available, the Purism phone and the Librem, and, you know, devices like that, because I appreciate the convenience of these devices, and I like that. I want to limit my exposure to them because of radiation, but I also understand that they're valuable and they can help us network. So I think we need to, for one, as simple as it sounds, question our relationship with the technology in general. I think that so many of us, especially, you know, I'd say like my age and younger, and even people who are being born into the internet, basically, we often don't question. We just sort of blindly, oh, there's a new upgrade. Okay, I'll get that. There's a new device. I'll get that. You know, it's important to stop and ask, like, do I really need this device? You know, or do I want to expose myself to this radiation? Like right now I'm working on, you know, a keyboard that's plugged in and a mouse that's plugged in. I rewired as much as possible so that I'm not exposed to Bluetooth and things like that. So from the health.
Yeah. Wait. No, I lost you. Wait. No. I lost your sound. Now you're back.
Check.
Wait. All right. Yes.
You can hear me?
So we were, sorry. We lost connection for a bit. But we were talking about the importance of trying to opt out of this, you know, and rewire is important. So if you can in your house, you can rewire. Yeah.
Exactly. Like you can, like I said earlier about the Wi-Fi router box, you can either request from your cable company or go buy a new one, a router that actually doesn't have Wi-Fi in it, so that it's not putting off Wi-Fi. And if you want to, if you're able to, if you choose to, you can buy Ethernet cables and you can plug in your desktop and your laptop. And I've even seen, some adapters where you can plug in your phone into an Ethernet directly to your router. So you could be on the internet at home, but not streaming, because the thing is, when you're streaming movies, music, whatever, that's, the phone has to work harder, and that's when you're actually being exposed to more radiation as the phone has to push out more power, right? So the idea being that if you're plugged into the router, it's not sending out through the Wi-Fi trying to get a signal, you know, it's just directly connected into the router. So there's things like that. And then of course, on the privacy end, I mean, I talk about things like facial recognition. We talk about drones. And again, like these ideas are really getting a big push with the COVID-19 right now. I've seen examples of activists in Chile and in China, Hong Kong, pulling down drones with lasers, people, you know, putting ropes around facial recognition towers and pulling them down. And I mean, it might eventually come to that. I mean, if we're unable to stop it, I don't think that signing petitions And
Yes.
you know, voting for new people is going to stop the technocracy from rolling out. I know that there's some people who wish it was that easy. I think that it might literally come to people being willing to say, you're not putting this in our neighborhood. We're not going to accept this. And you know, I talk about that as well. That strategy is known as monkey wrenching, which is kind of like an old school environmental anarchist tactic of just literally trying to, you know, they would go and try to block machines from tearing down trees, or, you know, tearing down forest, or they would go try to just, you know, destroy the machines themselves so that people couldn't work. And that's kind of a controversial topic for some people. But I think that when it comes to protecting you, your family, and your communities, these people are literally saying for their future, they're going to have to roll out these towers everywhere, and that you have no say. That's the other thing. Because of the corporate governmental relationship, they're passing laws and rulings saying, you can't decide, your neighborhood can't decide, your state can't decide, your community can't decide. So, I mean, it's a total corporate state takeover, the technocratic state takeover. I think we have to be careful. You know, there are some creative ways. There's people talking about different types of makeup, talking about 3D printing masks, talking about, you know, different haircut style, you know, all kinds of weird ways that could, clothing, things that could throw off facial recognition cameras, that could throw off. Now, of course, if you're dressed all weird and crazy, it's probably going to make you stand out more than anything, right? But these are the kinds of topics and conversations that might become normal in our reality in this technocratic future, you know, where we have to, I do believe in the power of technology. And I think that every time they try to create something to spy on us or to control us, people like yourself, developers, are going to create, exactly. People are going to create something to, you know, you have the thing that spies on you, but then you got the thing that can hack the thing that spies on you. And then you got the thing, you know, so we're kind of just,
a balance.
Exactly.
Well, I hope it becomes a balance, because right now it's pretty unbalanced. But this is exactly what Academia Blockchain is about. We are here because we see the importance of decentralizing information. At the beginning, the information to be decentralized was money. You know, money is just information. Bitcoin decentralized that. Then we can say something happened to Bitcoin, but there's still other projects like Monero. What we can see in the future is that the internet will be divided in two. The internet will be divided in the centralized, surveilled internet, and few people will know how to opt out of that and will access this free internet with mesh networks, private cryptocurrency, and through open blockchains and several other things. So we would have a divided internet, and it's incredible how The Matrix, the movie, is so spot on the future. So it's going to be like that. And
I don't, just sorry to interrupt you. I don't think it'll even just be the internet though, man. I think that that's what society is headed for in general, where we're going to have a fractured world where the people who, like you said, like with the internet, who are on the controlled internet and censored internet, but also who are a part of the society that is controlled, and like they, you know, they're in a very filtered bubble, and the state promises them they're going to keep them safe. And those of us, and I think again, it will involve a social credit score, some type of digital tracking people in the system, and you either opt in and you can drive, you can travel, you can work, or if you don't participate, then you're, you know, pushed out of society. And so I think it's going to happen to the internet, where the internet's going to split, but also our society itself will split between people who submit to all this technology and those who don't.
Well, let me add a bit there. I think it is very important to understand the power of biometrics. Biometrics is like linking your digital ID to your internet ID. You can use maybe your iris or your fingerprint. But in that topic, if we get to a point where that becomes very fascist, we may have to develop ninja skills. What do I mean by ninja skills? Like we may need to develop a possibility to enter this system without being noticed. And well, what is very interesting is that this happened in Japan, when there was a war between the ninjas and the shoguns and the samurais. And at the end, the ninjas lost, but they didn't die. All of them didn't die. Some of them had to continue their lives as if they were samurais. This is interesting to see in the history of the world. It has happened before. So I would like to connect that with my next questions, that I think it is about your Freedom Network, the Freedom Network project. I think it's very important, and Well, can you describe to us what is the Freedom Cells, freedomcells.org?
Yeah. Well, that's a really awesome story. I always appreciated ninjas, and I think you're right. There might be a time where we have to bust out our ninja skills to be able to survive in the coming future. And yeah, one of those things is organizing, is getting together in a decentralized way. Obviously, we're doing that through the internet, and you were talking about mesh networks and decentralizing the internet itself, which is definitely the direction we need to move in. But Freedom Cells, freedomcells.org, is basically a concept that I've been promoting since 2016, and now finally is kind of catching on because people are really worried about the future of the world, and so they're looking for solutions. And thankfully, people have found some of my recent interviews talking about the Freedom Cell Network. Basically, a Freedom Cell is, for one, we call it a Freedom Cell because in the US, for years, the government was saying that there's these terror cells, out there. People are organizing and do terrorism. And so we kind of took that and wanted to create cells or groups that are about freedom and liberty and that sort of thing. But also because the concept, since it's decentralized, if you think about all the different cells in your body right now that are doing their job and performing their duty from your brain, down to your toes, they're completely, some of them are working together on tasks, some of them are working completely and independent of each other, but together they create this whole that is you as a human being. And so that's how we kind of see these cells, is that we can create a Houston Freedom Cell or a Mexico Freedom Cell, and it's growing all around the world now. It's been really beautiful to see. Or, you create a cell or we've had people call them circles or hives or hubs. The name doesn't really matter. The goal is that we come together in these decentralized groups. We say ideally 7 to 8 people. There has been some various research talking about group size and what's the most functional group number. And the idea being with 7 to 8, maybe 9 people, is that if you have too many people beyond that, it starts to get a little too chaotic in order to perform certain tasks. But also if you have only a couple of people, it's harder to do some things. So the idea being that you start networking in your community, you find your cell, your tribe, your hub, whatever you want to call it, and your crew, and maybe it's only 2 or 3 people at the beginning. Then you start learning, okay, well, what are our skills? What are our interests here? Okay, we all want to learn about crypto. Well, you're the crypto developer, so why don't we do a skill share and you teach us everything about crypto so we all understand, the basics of that. And then we decide, well, hey, we want to make sure we know how to defend ourselves. So we go out and we take a self-defense class, or we go out and get some firearms and go do some gun shooting, practicing, and that sort of thing. So we all have that basic knowledge. We make sure that everybody can do CPR in case somebody needs CPR. You realize that everybody wants to learn about permaculture and growing food. So you start watching those documentaries and you start going to volunteer at community gardens. This is basically just your tribe, your inner group, that you want to make sure that there's no one leader that is kind of taking care of everything, but that everybody is bringing their knowledge and their skills and their resources to the table. And it's kind of the power and the knowledge is diffused within that group. So that, let's say you get sick or you move on or you just decide that you don't want to be involved anymore, our group is not useless once you leave, right? You've already taught us how to use crypto and we all learned about it. And so that knowledge stays within the group and it can spread on and go elsewhere. So you start out with this, your main circle, your main cell, which ideally you want to get to 7 to 8 people. And if you do get to beyond that number, well, then you splinter off and you create 2 different cells. Maybe you end up with 2 cells in the same town. So you make it where, okay, let's do one for the east side of town, one for the west side of town. And those who live there, they go there. And they work independently, but also, let's say one day you want to do a really big project and you want to 3D print a bunch of garden tools and then go out together and build gardens with these 3D printed tools. And so your teams come together and you go find, just all kinds of projects. The point is you guys come together and you work together. Now, when this starts to grow, as people are building in the US and in South America and in Australia and in Europe, these different groups are popping up and they each have different focuses, different interests. Not everybody's necessarily an anarchist or anything like that. It's, it's not meant to be that. It's truly meant to be decentralized. So some people's freedom cells might be focused on peaceful parenting because they're a group of parents that want to share those ideas and those skills. Some people might focus on crypto. Some people might focus on permaculture or whatever. Maybe one group does it all and focuses on everything. Some might be more focused on activism in the streets. But so we created this website called freedomcells.org, and on there you can go and you can create a free account. And you basically, in your profile, you can put your skills that you have and things that you're interested in learning. And then you can add yourself to our member map so that people can, just put your city or your town or whatever, and people can come and search. And you can search 50 miles, 100 miles. You can search in your area and see if there's anybody near you so that you can connect in the digital world but with the hopes of, building real world freedom cells and starting to build these groups. So we've got a lot of people joining the website in the last couple of weeks. We've got so we have two maps. We have the map for the individuals, the members, and we have a map for the cells. So you can search and see if there's a cell in your area. And what I recommend to anybody who's interested is just create your interests, put your, what you want to learn, what you have to offer, add yourself to the map, search. If you don't find anybody in your area or any groups in your cells in your area yet, create one, because that's what's going to help the next person. When they come along and they search, they're going to find you, and then you guys can start communicating, collaborating. And it's been really exciting. I got to say, like, it's been really, really awesome to see this growing lately. And we're actually, I don't know when this interview is going to come out, but on Saturday, the 16th, we're going to be doing our third International Freedom Cell conference call, and it's going to be on Zoom. Anybody's open to join, no matter which country, where you're at in the world. It'll be 2 p.m. Central Time as far as North America. So if you want to figure out your time zone, I know that there's going to be some people in Australia who said they're going to wake up at 5 a.m. to be a part of it. So wherever you're at, you can join, and basically just people are going to be sharing, this is what we're doing here. I have some questions, I have some ideas. And so we can just collaborate together, because this is a concept I put out there, but I don't have all the answers. And it's like any true decentralized project should be, it's totally dependent on the people who get involved, right? I mean, I think it's a great idea, but if it just sits on the shelf and nobody makes use of it, well, then it's useless. But if people adapt it and use it and make it their own and use it for their purposes, then it can be something very beautiful. And of course, the goal is we're trying to build this decentralized alternative network that can compete directly with the technocratic state and not have to play their political game or deal with their things. And also, like we were talking about earlier, people who want to opt out of, maybe, some people might choose biometrics, some people might choose not to, some people might choose vaccines, some people might not choose, some people might choose social credit. Otherwise, the point is that it's voluntary. You have a choice, right? And so those who choose not to use those systems, I think the only way you're going to survive is coming together in communities, building these decentralized networks, these cells, these circles, these hubs, and trying to build the next world. So that's what we're doing, man. We're really trying to work on that idea out here in Mexico and push it everywhere else we can. And I invite everybody to check the website out. It's freedomcells.org.
Yes, I love the project, and I like it that you underline the importance of connection, because another thing that can be said is that in these times, in this moment in history, many people can feel alone in their houses because they know all that is happening in the world, but they do not have anyone to talk to, to share these ideas, to say, hey, what can we do about it? Because this information comes from the internet, and there are many people that probably are subscribers to this channel that they do not have anyone to talk to or to connect with and share these topics. It is very important to reflect and to resonate. And I think freedom cells can be a solution to that as well. If you resonate these ideas, you become more powerful. If you do not have anyone to talk to about these ideas in your own city, in person, then this can be frustrating. So people that follow this channel in Argentina, in Spain, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Chile, in Ecuador, create a freedom cell. I already created one in Quito, so you're welcome to join, and we can meet in person. I would love that. So Derrick,
that's great.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming. Thanks a lot for talking to us, and sharing all of your knowledge about 5G and about the situation of the technocratic state eating the cities of the world. And well, I hope we can talk again soon. Maybe not soon. Let's see how this evolves, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Do you have anything else you want to share with us?
No, I just want to add to that last point you said, man. First, again, thanks for having me on. But also what you said was so important that people, I think sometimes we forget how our emotional, personal world, how important that is in this awakening we're trying to be a part of, right? We get focused on, I know for me, I get focused on the journalistic side of things. I'm investigating people and places and names and studies and this, and then I know you're involved in crypto. So I feel like we can get sucked into that and totally forget about our personal world and how important this is, and the growing this better world. For me, what I call the conscious resistance is about bringing together, exposing the state and the physical, the Federal Reserve and the banks and all that, but also working on our internal world. And what you said was so important, that when people feel alone, when they feel like they've got the information, but they don't have anybody to talk to about it, that's a very dangerous place to be, and it's a very lonely place to be. And I started organizing meetings in Houston in 2011, the summer of 2011, and stopped having them a couple years ago. For about 8 years, I was hosting meetings every single month in Houston, and not a single month passed where somebody showed up to one of our events and said, I feel alone. I can't talk to my friends. I can't talk to my family. People think I'm crazy. And so there's so many people out there who feel alone. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you do feel alone, use the website. We put it out there, not because we don't make any money off it. It's totally free, and we want to make it more decentralized. We want to put it on a blockchain. We want to do all these great things with it, but make use of it, help it grow so that you can find other people. And maybe you won't feel so alone if you just take that first step. So thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Derrick.